Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek Live. If you are watching live, then apologies for the slightly late start today. Technology. But today we are looking at Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, who played quite a big part in season 1 of House of the Dragon, and is this figure in Fire and Blood who kind of like hangs over the Dance of the Dragons as this queen, as the queen who never was, but this queen who is there, and you're always wondering, would she have done better than Viserys? And I think, maybe we'll unpack this a bit more as we go on, but I think the answer probably is yes. I'll, as always, try to get to as many different questions as I can from the chat as we're going through. I will frame this around questions I've got already from my patrons, but I thought I'd start by giving a bit of an overview about Rhaenys. Now, Rhaenys Targaryen is known as the Queen Who Never Was because she was the eldest daughter of the eldest living son of Jaehaerys I. Now, Jaehaerys lived a long time. He had a very long reign, and he had 13 children, and the oldest surviving son was Aemon. Aemon grew up and became the Prince of Dragonstone, the heir apparent. He had a daughter, Rhaenys, and when he died, because Aemon did die, when he died, there came a small succession crisis. Who was the heir after Aemon? Now, Jaehaerys decided that the heir was going to be Balon, his next oldest son. But lots of people, including Queen Alicent, thought it probably should have been Aemon's daughter. Now, the biggest issue at this time, as far as the succession was concerned, was the fact that Rhaenys was pregnant but had no children at the time. So the question was, who was going to succeed her? Even if we decide that maybe the woman shouldn't succeed, perhaps she has a son, should the son succeed? But Jaehaerys said no. Balon is my heir. This caused what was known as the first quarrel between Jaehaerys and Alicent. Alicent basically left him for a couple of years over this issue about who should succeed. And Rhaenys, from this moment on, became known as the Queen Who Never Was, because she could have been queen, but Jaehaerys decided no. But then Balon died. The person who Jaehaerys had decided should inherit died. Now, who should then inherit after that? By this point, Rhaenys had got a son, Laenor. And so Jaehaerys, quite old at the time, decided he would have this great council. This was beyond him to decide. He wasn't going to decide. He was going to rule. He was going to die very soon anyway. He got all of the lords in the realm together and said, you decide who will be the next king or queen of Westeros. Now, at this point, this is the Great Council of 101. This is the thing that we see right at the very beginning of House of the Dragon, Season 1, this Great Council. This is when Viserys gets chosen. Viserys is the oldest son of the second son of King Jaehaerys. Rhaenys is the oldest daughter of the first son. And it's a very clear decision. You go with male preference primogeniture, which means it goes down through the oldest son to the next son, always through the male line, down to Viserys. Why is this important when we get to the Dance of the Dragons? Because Viserys ignores this. This was the basis on which he was made king, and yet he straight away ignores this and says, my daughter is the heir. Rhaenyra is the heir. Not my son, not Aegon, who, if you took the rules that were there when he became king, you would say Aegon was the heir. But he decides that Rhaenyra should be the heir. So The simple fact that Rhaenyra is the heir apparent immediately makes everyone go back and say, but surely that means that Rhaenys should have been the heir. When we scroll forward through time, there is an attempt by the powers that be to bring these two sides back, to say, okay, maybe Rhaenys was done wrong. Maybe she should have been queen. Maybe we need to bring that part of the Targaryen family back into the family tree. So there is, first of all, this attempt to get Viserys, when his first wife dies, to marry Laena, Rhaenys' daughter. He doesn't. Again, there's a little bit of a falling out. But finally, we get Rhaenyra marrying Laenor, who is Rhaenys' son. So the two families are indeed brought back together. Rhaenys is basically skipped. Maybe she should have been queen. Maybe, as everyone looks and says, maybe it would have been better that way. But it doesn't matter, because we've kind of fixed the family tree. We've brought it all back together again. And Rhaenys' son is now going to be marrying Rhaenyra, and their children are going to sit on the Iron Throne. And this is obviously then the heart of the problem when we get to the fact that Rhaenyra's children, are they actually really Laenor's children? Or is Laenor gay, which he obviously was, and Rhaenyra's children are actually Harwin Strongs? So that's where Rhaenys kind of fits into this family tree. And as I say, she's always hovering over this, because she's this kind of slight anomaly in the family tree. She could have been queen. Perhaps she should have been queen. But now when the Dance of the Dragon starts, she's 55. Her time has pretty much gone. On the show, I think Eve Best does a fantastic job. On the show, she's very much kind of world-weary. She's there thinking, you know what? The nobles of this land will never accept a woman on the Iron Throne. She kind of tries to give Rhaenyra this sort of pep talk, sort of dampen down your expectations kind of talk, trying to say this is never going to happen. So by the end of season 1 of House of the Dragon, we're wondering which way Rhaenys is going to go. Now, the book went in a slightly different direction, but on the show, when we get to episode 9, when we get Rhaenys escaping King's Landing, and she gets this moment, she gets on top of a dragon, which comes up through the floor of the dragon pit, and we'll have questions on this later, so we'll dig into it a little bit more. But when she is there on her dragon, facing Aegon II, just after he's being crowned, and she is looking at him, and she has that decision at that moment in time. Should she just flame him and all of Team Green? And she doesn't. The question is always why? Why might she not do that? But she is perhaps the person who is there thinking, you know what? I don't think there should be a war over this. Can we prevent a war? So Rhaenys is this layered character who actually gets given more layers on the show than she does have in the book. This layered character who was overlooked for the throne, and yet she has this chance to decide who should be on the throne, and decides not to take it away from Aegon. So that's the kind of the overview. Let's get into some questions from the chat. First of all, we've got Springboks Banzera saying Rhaenys has a strategic mind and great bravery. I don't think a woman can be like that. They are too emotional. Well, I mean, I think I would disagree on that one, but she is definitely strategic and is brave. I think that the way they portray her on the show is, as I say, it's somebody who's seen it. she's seen all of this. She's made up her mind about whether or not they will allow, they being the nobles of the land, will allow a woman on the throne. And I think that colours her actions from that moment forward. I think she has decided, no matter what, a woman will not be allowed to sit on the Iron Thrones, which makes her decision eventually to get behind Rhaenyra's claim quite an intriguing one. Because if she is coming behind somebody's claim who she thinks ultimately will not succeed, it's because she thinks that that person is in the right. And so actually Rhaenys is sitting in a position of fundamentally just doing what she thinks is right, as opposed to what she thinks is effective or what will bring her the most power. Andrew K saying, hopefully season 2 expands more with Rhaenys. In the text, it comes across much more how suited she would be to rule and how brave and noble she was. Yeah, so I think that they will, I mean, I should probably say at this point, the spoilers policy of this channel is show spoilers are not okay, book spoilers are fine. So the show has broadly been sticking by the books. There have been some quite significant changes, but broadly it's sticking by the books. So I will say things which happen in the books, which probably will happen in the show, but we can't be 100% sure. But in terms of what happens with Rhaenys, I can't see her surviving more than 3 or 4 episodes of season 2. So the Battle of Rook's Rest, if I had to guess, was probably episode 3 of season 2. We've got episode 1 is probably Blood and Cheese. Then we've got some kind of recovery from that, and then episode 3 probably is Rook's Rest. So we probably don't have huge amounts of development left of her character in this show. I think that maybe we will see a little bit more of a character thing with her in deciding to go to Rook's Rest, but that's probably it. Brothers Crin saying the show portrayed Rhaenys as an imbecile who deserves to later be cooked. She had all her enemies at her mercy, yet tucked tail from the throne room. I mean, I think my take is that's not exactly what happened there. Maybe we'll get into that scene in a bit. For those who need reminding, and this wasn't the case in the books. In the books, she was happily ensconced away from King's Landing when the coup happened. On the show, she was in King's Landing, and she makes an escape. But her escape is via dragon. She has to get her dragon. Her dragon is the dragon pit underneath where the coronation is happening. She gets on her dragon. Dragon bursts up through the floor of the dragon pit. She has her moment. She could burn all of Team Green. My take is that we kind of view this with the hindsight of what happens later. At this moment in time, she has just had a chat, and this is the way the show framed it. So I'm coming from a show perspective in what I'm about to say. She's just had a chat with Alicent. Alicent has basically said, we can stop a war. Trust me. Aegon is in my control. I am going to put peace terms to Rhaenyra. We can stop this. And that is what is going on in Rhaenys' mind at that moment in time. The second thing that is going on in Rhaenys' mind at that moment in time, show world, again, this isn't the books, show world. The second thing that's going on in her mind is the fact that Corlys Velaryon, her husband, is ill. And she is now a part of Team Velaryon, and he will have views on this. She wants to go back and find out what his views are on this, and she does not want to commit to something yet. So I view what she did there rather charitably, it has to be said. Her take was, I could just kill lots of people right now and end this. Or I could go away and hopefully those people don't have to die. It probably wasn't in her mindset in the show that if I go away now, there's going to be a civil war which is going to kill thousands upon thousands. That probably wasn't in her mind. So, show Rhaenys, I kind of understand it. I kind of get where she's coming from on there. But in the book, that never happened. So let's, well, I think we have to separate these two different things. Question from Martin S. In the first episode of Rings of Power, we'll try and keep this one on the Rhaenys Targaryen and Fire and Blood, if that's okay, Martin. I will try and answer a few more Rings of Power questions towards the end. But in the first episode of Rings of Power, the other elf children bully and harass Galadriel of the royal Noldo House of Finwë. Would regular children bully a Targaryen child like that in Westeros? Well, in Rings of Power, we didn't know who those other children were. So I think that whether they're bullying her, I don't know. Would regular children bully a Targaryen child like that in Westeros? It's a matter of who the regular children are. And what we find in A Song of Ice and Fire are lots of examples of noble children, perhaps not top-tier noble, bullying top-tier noble children. So, for example, we get Big and Little Walder effectively bullying Bran. Now, in Winterfell, in A Clash of Kings. So, it does happen because at that age, the sort of the stratospheres of nobility have not yet been fully established. But it's less likely, but it does sometimes happen. Chelsea Oliver, I wonder what would happen if Aemon had survived and outlived Jaehaerys and she was heir to the king. How much could this change things? No dance. Yeah, this is interesting. So if Aemon, this is Rhaenys' father, had survived, and would this have prevented the Dance of the Dragons? In the short term, probably yes. We don't know who Aemon would have declared his heir. And my kind of meta-narrative on all of this is that House Targaryen had reached the point where it was expanding out enough that probably a civil war was going to happen anyway. When you get that many people with dragons and that many claims to the throne, you just need some kind of catalyst to make this tip over into war. So would it have changed things? Probably in the short term, but we shouldn't forget we had a couple of decades under Viserys of peace. That probably would have happened under Aemon. And it's a matter of what happens after that. So who would he have declared his heir, and would that have prevented a civil war? Possibly. I mean, I guess we'll never know. But the fundamental point is the Targaryens, every generation, certainly up to this point in Targaryen history, every generation there is a succession crisis. So you have Aegon the Conqueror, and he hands it over to his son Aenys. But there's lots of talk, should Aenys really have survived? When he dies, his half-brother takes power. Basically, it's a coup attempt. When Maegor dies, Jaehaerys takes power. Again, we say maybe he should have done. He was a good king. In hindsight, it was a good thing, but it was a coup. He took over in place of the named heir. So After him, there needed to be this great council to decide who should be there, because there was rumblings of some kind of discontent about who should take over. And then you go one generation after that, you get the Dance of the Dragons. Each generation, you get some kind of Targaryen succession crisis. The Blackfire rebellions. We get the even when you get down to the build up to A Song of Ice and Fire, Rhaegar was basically planning a coup against his father. Each generation of the Targaryens had their succession crisis. So I don't think as good as Aemon may have been as king, and I suspect actually Jaehaerys was great. Viserys did actually whisper it, but he did quite a good job as king. However good a job Aemon might have done, I think there would have been a succession crisis after him. Amy Smith saying, I think Rhaenys is the most mature person in the entire show. She's definitely the only family member who's gone to therapy. Yeah, certainly on the show. As I said, in the book, she's not as well developed. But in the show, yes, absolutely. I think we can probably all sign off on the fact that she just seems to have come to terms with what has happened to her. This is one of the best written things I think about the entire show, is the fact that they didn't develop all of the backstory with her. They didn't give us chapter and verse about the fact that she could have been queen, but we see it. We see that she's sat there, she's looking at Rhaenyra, she has a little chat with her, she gives her the benefit of her wisdom. She clearly loves Viserys, despite the fact that Viserys on the show is the person who became king rather than her. She clearly loves her family. She seems to have come to terms with her past and her present, and that is a really great thing, and it's something that most of the rest of the Targaryens definitely have not got. So yeah, when you say she's the only one who's gone to therapy, I would agree completely with that. A quick flick through. Matthew Stewart saying, good evening, Robert. I have a general question regarding House of the Dragon Season 2, which will tie into where we see Rhaenys go. Do you think we will end the season at the Gullet or in the sacking of the capital? I think in the sacking of the capital. My, again, spoilers-ish. My general take is, if we have 4 seasons, which seems to be what they're saying, Season 1 was clearly the build-up to the dance. Season 2 is going to be the dance up to the point at which Team Black take King's Landing. Season 3 is the point up to where Team Black have to flee King's Landing, and Season 4 is going to be the aftermath and all of that. So that's where we're at. The Gullet, the battle of the Gullet, I think is partway through Season 2, if I had to make a guess. And in terms of a filming update, Matt Smith has said he's now received scripts for Season 2, which is always a good sign, which means that they will soon start filming. My understanding is that they will start filming in April. Now, probably 10 months. It was 10 months filming Season 1, probably 10 months for Season 2. That takes us through to February-ish next year. Give or take 6 months for post-production. In short, we're looking at the second half of next year for when Season 2 is happening. So that's the general feel of what it is. They will be filming in Spain. I'd thought originally they were going to start filming back at home base near London, but it sounds like they're going to probably start filming in Spain first. They've got that booked in, Spain being the King's Landing scenes, and they've got that booked in for April. So second half of 2024. And for those who care about these things, Rings of Power, I'm expecting probably in the first half of 2024. Let's go to a question from Sri Lankan living abroad for a while. Great username. The daughter of Rhaenys the Dreamer, Elena Targaryen, ruled equally with her brother husband Aegon Targaryen. It seems like the first two generations of Targaryens on Dragonstone were gender equal slavers. Well, I mean, we don't have huge amounts of information about this. The slavery thing, we don't know the details of. The Valyrians were slavers. That bit we know. And that is what has gone out into places like, well, most of the free cities, to be honest, who still practice slavery. By the time the Targaryens invaded Westeros, they had clearly left slavery behind them in some way. We don't ever get an insight into what the moment was where they shifted between those two. But it was somewhere in that 100 years or so between the Doom of Valyria and the invasion of Westeros. As for the co-ruling, I don't think it's said in exactly those terms that this was co-ruling. And by the time we get to the invasion from Aegon and his sisters, it's very clear that a decision was made that Aegon was head of the household. In fact, before that, he was head of the household. He married Visenya. This is the way that it is framed by the Maesters, the extent to which we have to accept the Maesters' interpretation of history is up in the air, of course, but he married Visenya out of duty and then married Rhaenys out of love. So he was always the named king, and although they did co-rule with him, in as much as they literally ruled when he wasn't sat on the Iron Throne, he was the first among equals. So I think the answer to this is that we do not know the details of exactly when they shifted from where they were to where they ended up. Martin S. had a message retracted, not sure what that one was. Sri Lankan living abroad. Oh, you're saying, so by the time of the conquest, this is a follow-up to your last one, by the time of the conquest, Visenya, the eldest daughter, was nominally subordinate to her brother. Did the Targaryens acquire Westerosi misogyny in the century that they stayed in Dragonstone? Yeah, so we don't know, is the answer. They shifted. We know, assume we know, where they were to start with. It's possible, if you kind of give them the benefit of the doubt, it's possible that when they were over in Valyria, they were anti-slavery. We don't have anything that says, well, they were on Dragonstone, they practiced slavery. So, and also we don't know, there's nothing that says, well, they're on in Valyria, they practiced male preference primogeniture. We simply do not know, because the information we have about that period in time with the Targaryens is extremely limited. We have to make the assumption that they were part of the Valyrian infrastructure, and so the things that applied there, they took across with them. And in that 100 years, where they slowly shifted their focus, as far as we can tell, from eastwards, from Dragonstone, to westwards towards Westeros, that's when we get the modern-ish version of the Targaryens. My general guess is that the male preference primogeniture, in terms of the male being the head of the household or the leader, that seems to have hung on from Valyria and I say that on the basis of that seems to be what other places have taken from there as well. Reflective Rambling, TGV, picking up a question for TGV. Thank you very much. I love it when people do this. Thank you, Reflective Rambling. What made Rhaenys decide to not fight for the throne? So I think this is a matter of when. Because when she was first potentially there as heir, there was a king. There was already a king, and the king was still in fine and robust fettle. Jaehaerys was there, would rule for a long time after her. There was no reason to think. And she was, I think, 16 when she got overlooked for, maybe even younger, actually, when she got overlooked for being the heir. And why wouldn't she fight? Because this wasn't a matter of her being queen. This was a matter of who was going to be the heir, which is a very different thing. Everybody owed their loyalty to the king, and the king then made a decision. So that's why she didn't at the time. Then we get, so that was the first snub, and you can kind of understand why she kind of, all right, accepted it. The second snub was when we get the Great Council. And at that point, it was not actually her, it was her unborn child that was the issue, or Laenor who was the issue. Her unborn child was the issue the first time around, and the second time it was the fact that she had Laenor. But why didn't she go to war then? Because the Maesters said that the vote was 20-1 at the Great Council. Now, I hugely doubt this for many, many reasons. But the way that the Maesters recorded this is that the votes came in 20-1 against Laenor and in favor of Viserys. If that's the case, why would you go to war if you think that 95% of the nobles are against you? You just get a bit of a sulk on and go home, which is what they did. So that's the second time, after which she wasn't ever in the running for being queen herself. It was just a matter of could she possibly get her children onto the throne. Question from Raven's Oath. Greatly appreciate you, Robert. Thank you, and all of your content. Random question. What Targaryen would have been the best and worst to sit on the throne but didn't? Bella Breakspear would have been great as a king. Everyone seems to think that. Who would have been terrible as a king? I mean, I think maybe his brother. There are quite a few bad Targaryens going back through history. Maegor obviously did sit on the throne and would have been terrible. I don't know. Let me know in the chat. This is a really interesting question. Let me know in the chat who you think, out of all the Targaryens who didn't sit on the throne, who do you think would have been the worst king or queen? Martin S. saying, when Rhaenys lost the throne to Viserys, did she just let it go? If that is the case, and if she had not, would it have resulted in a civil war? So this is where the book and the show slightly differ, in that the show presented this as being the Great Council was her against Viserys. That was not what it was in the books. In the books, we had Viserys against Laenor, her son. Now, should she have, or what would have happened if she hadn't let it go? The books, they kind of hint at the idea that there was a possibility of a civil war at that point. We get this image of her and Corlys going around Harrenhal trying to drum up support, giving out bribes, offering to promote people. Oh, you can get a bit of extra land, you can be a baron, you can whatever, that kind of thing. And at this point, let's not forget, Corlys was the richest person in all Westeros. He was working the room. Rhaenys was working the room. At this time, the biggest cheerleader for Viserys was his brother Daemon. What Daemon was doing was going around raising an army. So Team Viserys were concerned that they might not win. And if they did not win, then they needed an army. If they did win and Team Rhaenys or Team Laenor were not happy, they might also need an army. So was there a possibility of a civil war there? Absolutely. But it didn't happen. They did seem to just go, you know what? Fair enough, we'll back down. And the reason why, according to Fire and Blood, is that they asked the Maesters, and the Maesters said it was 20-1. I am hugely suspicious of this because, well, for two reasons. Firstly, the 20-1 is such a huge victory. This is like over 95% of the vote. This is more than what dictators often get when they're setting out their pretend democracies. This is overwhelming in favor of Viserys. And the second part of that is that does 95% sound even remotely possible, given the roll call of people we know were on Team Rhaenys/Laenor, which is House Stark, House Baratheon, two of the biggest and most important and influential houses in all of Westeros, were definitely supporting them. Plus, quite a few of the next tier down, the big and important but not top tier people like House Blackwood, like House Celtigar, like House Manderley, those houses also declared their support. Even with just those 5 houses, and there were more, that 95% figure seems very suspicious. So my take is that this was, even if the vote itself wasn't manipulated by the Maesters, I think the Maesters manipulated the presentation of the result in a way that made opposition to it seem fruitless. So I think that, in very simple terms, the vote was held. The Maesters, whether or not they went with what the result was, Viserys won, and then they presented to everyone that this was an absolute landslide. And I'm suspicious of the fact that it was a landslide. Andrew K saying this speaks to Rhaenys' book character. Also, she was not happy, but she had a nobility and grace about her. All the artsy saying 20-1 makes no sense. I would have asked for a public recount. The votes were not public votes. These were private votes, and the Maesters were in charge of it all. Amara O saying Viserys, son of Aerys, would have been a horrible king. Viserys, Daenerys' brother. Yes, so Viserys, who we saw in Game of Thrones season 1, yes, he would have been horrible as a king, definitely. We've had quite a few votes for him, actually. Arian says Caius Ballerina. Yeah, Arian would have, if you saw him, if you read Duncan Egg, he would have been pretty terrible. Otto Hightower saying the worst would have been Rhaenyra. Otto Hightower says that. Okay. So I think Maelys the Monstrous suggests John Potts. Arian, basically, yeah, Arian and Viserys, Daenerys' brother, win that one. Jordan Neeland saying, how powerful did one have to be to vote in the Harrenhal election, and was every vote equal in worth? We do not know. I'm a bit of a bit of a democracy nerd, and this is something which really bothers me about this, is that when we're not told, and this is absolutely fascinating, because does House Stark get one vote, and House Bolton also get one vote, and House Forrester also get one vote, and every single house in the north get one vote? Does that mean House Stark is worth, the same as the teeny tiny house in the north? That doesn't seem to be the way that politics goes in Westeros. Was there some kind of block voting? It's not 100% sure. That seems to, from what we're told in Fire and Blood, that seems not to be the case, because House Stark was their support for Team Rhaenys / Laenor was noted, and then separately we had House Manderley's support also noted. So it doesn't seem to be that. As far as we can tell, it was like, if you're a noble, you get a vote, but there's no transparency in the system, is what I'm saying. This is not what we would call democracy in any way, shape, or form. We know who won. Probably they had the majority of the votes, because as much as I can say the Starks, the Manderleys, the Baratheons are one side, the clear implications, they were in the minority, but probably not a 20-1 minority. All the arts is saying the Maesters cooked the books. Yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. Let's have a having a quick flick through, seeing that any more questions in the chat. I think that's probably good. Let's go to some questions from my patrons. I'll pick up more questions in the chat as we're going through. Do not worry. The King's Road saying, "G'day, Robert. G'day to you. Do we know anything about the early part of Rhaenys and Corlys's relationship? Did she stay at home while he was on his grand adventures? Also, can you describe her physical appearance in the books and explain any implications that may have on the dance as well as on the A Song of Ice and Fire story?" Well, in terms of her physical appearance, she comes across as very Targaryen, but she had dark hair. This was changed by George R. R. Martin. In the first draft, when he wrote some short stories, which eventually morphed their way into the world of Ice and Fire, which morphed their way into Fire and Blood. But by the time we get to Fire and Blood, she has dark hair, not the silver blonde hair of the Targaryens. Does that impact on the story? I don't think so, because I don't know whether you're trying from the angle that the children don't look like Laenor. Rhaenyra's children don't look like Laenor. The question there was that they do look like Harwin Strong. They look like strong children, and that's the issue. In terms of the early relationship between Rhaenys and Corlys, so they were a power couple. When they were together, they were the power couple of Westeros outside of the king and queen. She was, as stated, the queen who never was. He was a legend. He was the most traveled, the richest, the most astonishing character in all of Westeros. He had traveled further and wider than anyone in Westerosi history. He was the head of House Velaryon, which is the second of the three Velaryon houses in Westeros, and the closest to the Targaryens. And on his final journey, which he made all the way up to Ashai, he returned with such huge amount of riches that he could build a new castle. He could change where his capital was on his island. That became a new port, a hub for trade. Everything was shifting. Basically, the geopolitical and economic system of Westeros was shifting because of Corlys Velaryon. Now, he was, I think, 37 when he married Rhaenys. Rhaenys was 16. Now, yes, there's an age gap going on there, but in terms of who he was at this point, what we're told is he had finished his journeys. So by the age of 37, he'd done it. He traveled the world, and now he wanted to settle down. Now he was focusing in on his family. Now he was focusing on having a family for himself, and he wanted, the clear implication is there, he wanted his House Velaryon to get more powerful. So Rhaenys was there, young, wanting to travel the world. She says, we will see the world together, you on your ships and me on my dragon, but I will get there first because I'm on my dragon. We do not hear that they do go on those travels. She becomes pregnant, she has children, they set up a family. So they seem to have started off in slightly different moments in their life. He has done it all by this point. He's made his fortune. He's traveled the world, and now he wants to settle down. She's still 16. She wants to go off and see things, but she's met this guy, and as far as we can tell, this was a love match. They did get on really well, and they settled down and had children. So what do we know about that early relationship? Not much. George R. R. Martin doesn't tell us much, but as far as we can tell, it was good and it was solid. She still loved riding her dragon, and he still loved sailing, but they seem to have found their match. Let's go to Matthew Stewart just in the chat saying, I want a Duncan Egg show more than anything, but I want more of the stories done first. Catch 22. Yeah, so just in terms of what's happening next in terms of George R. R. Martin, I've given up guessing what happens when, but I think it's fair to say that the next thing we will see from him will be the Winds of Winter. Don't know when. After that, I'm pretty sure he will do other things before he gets onto A Dream of Spring. We know he finds it hard to concentrate just on the one thing. He is halfway through a Duncan Egg story, The She-Wolves of Winterfell. That won't be the final title of that. Incidentally, he will change it. I am pretty confident that after we get the Winds of Winter, we will get at least one and possibly two Duncan Egg stories quite quickly after that, before he moves on to other things. Martin S. saying, which most powerful houses in Westeros prior to Aegon's conquest? Interesting. So we had House Hoare, who were the kings of the Isles and the Rivers. That's where Harren the Black was. The Starks were there. The Hightowers were obviously important, but House Gardner were the Lords of the Reach. The Lannisters were rich. Basically, it's the same set of houses that we have afterwards, but plus the Gardners, plus House Hoare, plus, so there were three houses that went. The others were the Durrandons down in Storm's End. So those were the three that went. The rest of the main noble houses were exactly the same. Agree. Weirwood saying Starks, Arryns, Lannisters, Mudds, Gardners, and Durrandon. Yeah, so the Mudds were more powerful a bit earlier. By the time of Aegon's conquest, they were probably I mean, they were one of the kings, but not as powerful. They were the ancient kings rather than the kings at that time. Let's go to a question from George R. Tolkien saying, "Salutations, Robert. Salutations to you too, sir. I just wanted to ask you about the battle at Duskendale. Do you think," this is Rook's Rest, "do you think if Rhaenys had at least one more dragon on her side, she would have owned the day? Vhagar was ginormous, but with Melies and Vermithor, do you think the tides would have changed? Rhaenyra could really used Rhaenys' help in the end." Yeah, so this is what happens, book spoilers, obviously, quite soon after we get the battle over Shipwrecker Bay, which we've seen. Then we get Blood and Cheese. The next main thing that happens is the battle over Rook's Rest. Now, they've already set this up. Rhaenys, at the end of season 1 of House of the Dragon, her role is this kind of roving brief. She's there looking out over the gullet, looking out over the areas around there, supervising this economic blockade that has been set up. So she's on her own on the dragon. Now, what are Team Green going to do? Now, they will realize they have one or two big advantages. First of all, number one is they're established in King's Landing. Number two is they have Vhagar, who is the biggest and most impressive dragon in the world. They have to isolate. If they're going to use Vhagar correctly, they have to isolate, because as you've pointed out, there are 3 or 4 other dragons that Team Black have that are impressive. The reason why Team Black didn't just attack King's Landing is that they would have casualties. Undeniably, they would have casualties. So Team Green needed to isolate a few of the Team Black dragons. Rhaenys, they managed to isolate on Melies, and she gets taken down. She takes down Melies, takes down Sunfire, which is Aegon II's dragon, but Vhagar takes her down. So, would another dragon have helped? Undeniably. But I think that the main point here is that this isn't just a matter of Vhagar is unstoppable. This is the way it would have felt at the time. Vhagar is incredibly powerful. Vhagar against any other dragon is unbeatable. But it really is a matter of tactics as well as brute strength. Vhagar has the brute strength. When we get towards the end of this war, we get a battle between Vhagar and one other dragon, Caraxes. Now, Caraxes is not the biggest dragon. Caraxes is not the second biggest dragon. Caraxes is old, but not anywhere near, and big, but not anywhere near the size of Vhagar. But Caraxes took down Vhagar in the Battle over the God's Eye. How? By better tactics. By the fact that Daemon knew how to fight in a war, whereas Aemond had actually had limited experience of that. The way he does that is that he takes Caraxes right up, and I hope they do this very similarly in the show, right up into the sky high above Vhagar, and then comes down as the sun is blinding Vhagar, so Vhagar and Aemond cannot see the dragon that's coming down. And basically, Daemon uses this as a moment to take them all down. He doesn't care about dying at this point. He is happy for his dragon to take out Vhagar, and all of them die. The riders, the dragons. So perhaps Rhaenys could have done something similar. against Vhagar. It's possible. The issue is that what she was faced with was 2 dragons. She was outnumbered. She was almost certainly not expecting to be outnumbered. And she thought, I'll take out the dragon I can take out, which happens to have Aegon II, which, just as a by the by, I wonder whether the show will play this up. She had the chance to kill Aegon II, episode 9 of season 1. Episode 3 or 4, whatever it is, of season 2, she will have another chance, and she will decide to take it. So maybe we will see her regret what happened in that episode of season 1. Maybe we'll see her going, you know what? I decided not to end it then. I will end it now. I will get rid of Aegon II. And she very nearly does. And this is the thing which isn't really emphasized in the book, but she very nearly kills Aegon II. What happens then? I guess Aemond takes over as king, which he effectively does, but she tries to kill Aegon and very nearly does it. Let's go to the chat. Mara Lee saying, just a show of love and support. You are the best. Thank you very much. You know how much I appreciate your support, Mara. Saying, thank you, Robert, for the content and stories. You are very welcome. And also a super sticker as well. Thank you. I appreciate that. Kolnitsky saying, I never remember what dragon belongs to who. That do not worry. It's even for those of us who nerd over it all, it gets a bit complicated at times. Let's go to a question from Alhad. Rhaenys is almost 20 years younger than Corlys in the books. What is the age difference on the show? If possible, can you roughly tell the age differences for key characters on the show? Yeah, so the show haven't specified all of the age differences, but they have made a few very key changes. In terms of the age difference between Rhaenys and Corlys, I think they're trying to keep it the same. We only see the very end of it, but Corlys, they've sort of aged down a bit, but in the books, when we come to the Dance of the Dragons, he's there sort of like not at death's door, but he is old. He's getting to 80, and he's saying things like, oh, maybe the gods have preserved me for this last final struggle. And it's not that he got wounded and injured in the war, and that's what's making him say these kinds of things, which is probably where they're going to go in the show, but because he simply lived a long time. They squashed that down. So on the show, they seem to be similar-ish ages. The biggest difference that they've made to the ages on the show, in my view, is between Alicent and Rhaenyra. Now, in the book, there's a 9-year age gap. So, when Alicent marries Viserys, Rhaenyra is 9. Alicent is 18. So, their relationship that we saw on the show was they were basically teenage besties. That was the view that we got on the show, until it all got a bit awkward when one of them married the other's dad. That's not what happens in the books. In the books, Alicent is always a bit older, and so she marries Viserys, and Rhaenyra she's still a child. She's 9. She's a cupbearer to the king, and there isn't that relationship between the two of them. Now, I actually quite like what they did there. I'm more relaxed about changes between book and screen than some people I know, but I think that actually added something. I think that created a link between Alicent and Rhaenyra that meant that the outbreak of war got an extra layer, which I really liked. So that, I think, is the biggest difference. I think it's adding to what we've got rather than taking away from it. Charis Ballerina saying, or picking up for Simon Erickson, was it only about gender, or were there other reasons that the Lords preferred Viserys? We're not told. So the count came in. It was 20-1. We're told that this was despite the fact that there were lots of bribes going on from Corlys. We're told that this is despite the fact that Daemon was out there gathering an army, thinking it was going to be at least close. Why they went that way, the Maesters basically, and we have to remember the Maesters tell us the history, so everything we learn comes from what they tell us. The clear implication is that they just decided that that was what it should be because the man inherits, which is where they had gone before. Jaehaerys, let's not forget, had himself been, when he took the throne despite the fact that Arya was the named heir. Now, she was the named heir by his predecessor Maegor, so perhaps he was right in saying that's not something that I wish to keep on. But Arya was the eldest daughter of the king who never was, the Aegon the Uncrowned. So, the eldest daughter of the eldest child. So he, in coming king, he himself implicitly said there is male preference primogeniture. If his claim was based upon this fact. So although it's never said, the clear implication is that the fact that he, when he was naming his heir the first time around, went for male preference primogeniture, that was where his preference was for his child, his heir to be Viserys. So this was a sort of a continuation of an implicit Targaryen succession practice. Whether we think that's right or not is another thing, but the implication is that the Lords were going down that same route. Now, was it just about sex or gender? I think it's not just is the main issue. The Lords of the Realm were lords because of this very same principle, and there will be many of them who were only there because it passed to them rather than their elder sister or something along those lines. So it was in their best interest. We always focus in on the Targaryens and it's like, oh, let's decide who would be the best ruler. Everyone probably in their own world was thinking, well, if I vote to say that this should go down through the female line, does that not affect my own claim here? So I think that it's not a matter of only about this. This was about the system protecting itself. Because the idea, Dawn was outside of the Seven Kingdoms at this point. The idea that a woman could inherit was still quite rare within Westeros, let's put it that way. All the artsy saying the biggest change is that Kristen Cole does not age a single day. No, he doesn't. So there's, I mean, this is something which is inevitable with the way that they filmed this. I thought they did it quite well, but Kristen Cole, we had a big time jump, and Kristen Cole, the same actor, was there in the same way that Matt Smith, the same actor, was there all the way through. This is one of those suspension of disbelief things, I think. Question from Martin S, or just Super Sticker. Thank you very much indeed. Otto Hightower saying a small donation from the Bank of Aldertown. Thank you very much. Do you find it ironic that Rhaenyra asks the Lords of the Realm to remember their vows? I don't know if that ironic's the right word. She asked them to remember their vows to her. So this happened in the book as well as the show. Viserys says, everyone come down to King's Landing. You have to now accept the fact that this is now my heir. You must swear fealty. She is asking them to remember those vows. The older ones perhaps will have been around during the Great Council of 101, and they will have cast votes one way or the other. And there is an irony there that, as we understand it, the majority of them voted for the male preference primogeniture Viserys, and then they're now swearing fealty to her. So yes, but I think one of the things that they showed quite well on the show was the fact that a lot of the lords were there going, I mean, I didn't. My dad might have sworn fealty to Rhaenyra, but I didn't, because there was quite a big time jump between those events, a good couple of decades, basically. So is that ironic? Yes, it is ironic. But again, every generation of Targaryens has their succession crisis. Let's go to a question from Maura Lee, saying, I understand why Rhaenys was overlooked for queen by her grandfather, because he felt men needed to inherit the Iron Throne. But why was Rhaenys' son, Laenor, passed over as king? So this is playing into the question I've just been answering, actually, Maura, which I think this is self-serving, the system serving itself, the system protecting itself against any charges that perhaps they should not be, that the individual lords should not be in power, because they think the woman should inherit. Well, why are they in power then? Alhad saying, why did the Starks support Rhaenys in the Great Council of 101? They did not take any oath, as in the case of Rhaenyra. They did not. So we don't know. We're not told this. There is a lot of Stark history we do not know. But we do know that although the Kings of Winter, there seems to be just kings. We don't hear about any Queens of Winter. It seems to just be kings. There were certainly moments in that where women had a very, very strong role in the governance of the North. Now, in particular, 100 years or so later, when we get into the time of Dunk and Egg, the She-Wolves of Winterfell, this story that we will at some point get from George R. R. Martin, that is built on a moment when a lot of Stark men died in various ways, and you get these very strong Stark women all vying for power. That's what that story is going to be about. Exactly what role Dunk and Egg will play in that, we don't know. But if you look at the timeline, when they get up to Winterfell, that will be the situation they will come into. There were lots of Stark men who died, and there's lots of Stark women who are left there, perhaps jostling for power. Martin S. saying there are still people in the world today who believe women are unfit to rule. Unfortunately, old-fashioned, I know. More in certain countries. In the Middle Ages, I'm sure it would be more in common. Yeah, so I think one thing we have to say is that when we look at, for example, the Great Council of 101, we often look at it with modern, often Western eyes and say, well, that doesn't seem fair. But in the context of Westeros at that moment in time, that is just a keeping of the status quo. This was not a shock result. This is what I'm basically saying. This was what was always likely to be the case. Corlys was going on in there, Rhaenys was going in there, trying to push against all of history and establishment, and they failed. So should we be surprised? No. That doesn't mean Maesters did not cook the books in some way, but it's the expected and likely result. Question from Gadzook saying, "Hi Robert, would like to thank you for your tireless work. Tough times right now, and your channel helps me to find a calm center." Well, I'm delighted that I can play a small role in that. Do you think Rhaenys' dragon escape scene in House of the Dragon, with her seeming indifference to the horror inflicted upon ordinary people, will form part of the motivation of the small folk revolting later on in the dance? Yes. Thank you so much for this question, because this is something I really wanted to pick up on. So the scene we have is Alicent says, "Gather the small folk." Basically, she doesn't say it quite that way. She says, "Gather the small folk, push them into the dragon pit. I want all of them to see Aegon be crowned." Aegon is crowned. He's Blackfire. The Faith of the Seven anoint him. Everything above board, exactly. Big show. Holds up the sword. Ray comes the crowd. That is what they were wanting. But then up comes Melis, up through the floor, and our attention is on her looking at Aegon II and Team Green and deciding whether or not she should just Dracarys them. That is what we're being invited to focus on. And that is the main plot that we've been told about, obviously. She decides not, flies off. But our attention is not drawn to the fact that undeniably what happened then was there were dozens of fatalities, maybe more. A dragon bursting up through the floor, then flying away, doors bursting open. This is a lot of damage. And nobody mentions it. Nobody talks about it. Nobody focuses on it. But lots of the small folk were shoved into the dragon pit, made to stand there, and were then killed by the nobles who didn't even notice. This theme of the small folk being ignored, the needs and cares and wants of the small folk being ignored, is being played up in small ways, but it's being played up throughout this season. Daemon has this chat with Rhaenyra, and Rhaenyra basically says, "Why should we care about, we Targaryens, why should we care about what the small folk think?" And Daemon says, "You should always care about what when you're ruling, you will definitely need to care about what they think." Little mental note, that's going to come in important later. Then we get the Mysaria, the White Worm, who gets Otto Hightower down, and she parleys with him. This is the moment that she's been waiting for all of this time. She's been building up for it. What is it? She's got the new king basically held hostage. What is it that she's going to ask for? She asks for the crown's intervention to protect the most vulnerable in society, the children in the fighting pits. That's what she's wanting. That's the thing that she's spending all of her political capital that she's built up on to try and help the people. And Otto's going to forget this. He's going to ignore it, definitely. So the small folk being ignored, the small folk being killed, the small folk being just brushed aside is going to be a huge part of what happens over the course of the next couple of seasons of House of the Dragon. I am absolutely sure. Spoilers, obviously, but when we get towards the end of what I think will be season 3, the small folk, the people of King's Landing, will start getting agitated. They will start really hating these Targaryen overlords because they've had all the things that have happened so far, but also when Rhaenyra comes and rules, the taxes will go up, not just on the rich, but on absolutely everybody. The war will have prevented a huge amount of the basics of life coming into King's Landing because, if you remember, there was an economic blockade. That's what Team Black, the first thing they did was saying, let's do an economic blockade on King's Landing. So they're not getting food in. The small folk will start literally starving. And the starting of all of this, the moment that they will be able to look back on in the Dragon Pit, is the fact that Rhaenys killed them and didn't care with her dragon, came out bursting out through the floor, killed a whole load of them in the sight of everyone, and then just flew off. Is this going to be the catalyst? I don't know whether the catalyst is the right word, but this is definitely another step in the small folk looking at the Targaryens and going, you know what, and dragons in particular, and saying, you know what, we don't want them ruling us. Another nuance here is when you see that scene in episode 9 of season 1, everyone's getting funneled down. The gold cloaks are pushing people, they're getting people and they're funneling them to go to the Dragon Pit. We do see a man there who is a shepherd with lots of sheep. Was that a pure accident, or was that just a quick nod to the fact that in the future we will get a character called the Shepherd who starts rabble rousing, who starts working the people up to a position where they do wish to rebel? Would that character, who we don't actually see, but we notice that there is a shepherd, would that character, having witnessed what happened in the Dragon Pit first time around, where the small folk were herded in there and then killed by a dragon, would that character then turn into the character we know as the shepherd later? It's entirely possible. So is that going to be a part of the motivation? I think undeniably a part of the motivation. Whether it's like the key catalyst, I don't know, but it's definitely a part of the motivation. Let's go to a question from Diego Godoy saying, "Hola, Robert. Hola. Great character today, absolutely. In House of the Dragon, near the end of the first season, we saw Rhaenys being a bit skeptical regarding who to back in the Greens versus the Blacks. Now, going to Fire and Blood, do you think we get the feeling of a similar hesitation from Rhaenys? Given how she dies in the book, it seems she was quite involved in the Blacks team." We don't get the same uncertainty for two big reasons. Reason one, she was not there in King's Landing when the coup, the Team Green coup, was launched. She was happily ensconced back home, and we read about Corlys Velaryon joining, and with him Rhaenys. So the joining Team Black, this is. So the implication is that she was always there on Team Black. Which brings me to the second point, which is the reason why she hesitates on the TV show is that she is convinced that the murderer of her son, Laenor, was Daemon Targaryen. In the book, that's not the case. She may have suspicions, but we saw who killed. In the book, it's very clear who killed Laenor. This was Callie, and this happened out in the open. There were plenty of witnesses. Callie then disappears. The conspiracy theories are about who paid Callie. Was there somebody who gave him the money, who managed his escape? The implication is that this was Daemon, but it's not. It's never made clear. There are other possibilities. It's possible that it was just a fight between lovers. Who knows? On the show, they made it abundantly clear, 100% clear. This was Daemon and Rhaenyra who staged his death and allowed him to escape with his lover. And they are then covering it so that he can go off and live a happy second life over in Essos. So on the TV show, Rhaenys, believing that Daemon and Rhaenyra are responsible for her son's death, absolutely understandable. That's exactly what they want, what Daemon and Rhaenyra want. They accept that. They're taking it on the chin. They're saying, okay, this is the price of actually allowing that person his freedom. In the book, that's not the case at all. Maybe Rhaenyra was suspicious. That yes, there are hints, but the I hate Daemon, I hate Rhaenyra thing, which was there very strongly in the show, is not as strong in the books. So when she joins Team Black, it's not that much of a surprise. It's the obvious thing, because her grandchildren, forgetting whether they are actually her grandchildren, but her grandchildren, in name at least, are the heirs to the Iron Throne. If she says that Rhaenyra is queen, then her grandchildren are the heirs to the Iron Throne. And that's not the case if Aegon takes the throne, if Team Green win. If Team Green win, they're out. They're no longer a part of this. So this is a political decision as much as anything else. I think that's me caught up in the chat. Raven's Oath saying, I really dislike the Laenor change in the show. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about there, so I won't get into all of that. Breezy's Comics and Collectibles saying, hello, Robert, love your lives and videos. Well, thank you very much. Otto Hightower saying, Laenor's survival is a pointless change, similar to the Dragon Pit massacre. Yeah, I mean, those are the two biggest changes, I think I would say. And let's go to a question from Ty Farnsworth saying, hey, Robert, as a Chelsea fan, the only times I can cheer for the Reds is when the match stays outside London. My thoughts have been with you all week, my friend. Well, thank you. It has been a tough week for Man U fans, but, you know, tonight made it a little bit better. Already having a trophy in the cabinet also makes it a little bit better, but thank you very much indeed. Football aside, what was Rhaenys' relationship and opinions on Daemon? She's obviously sympathetic with her other cousin Viserys, but given Daemon's personality, his taking of her father's mount, and his later involvement in her son's death, I imagine she has more negative thoughts towards him. Yeah, so this is an interesting... So picking up on where I left off, one of the things that I really liked about what the show did with the character of Rhaenys was a moment. I mean, it wasn't really even a scripted moment. I don't know with the extent to which this was the actors or the direction or the showrunners, but there comes that moment when Viserys goes to Driftmark to talk to Corlys, and Rhaenys arrives and discovers that Viserys is there, and she strides into the room and she just gets a sudden look, and then this big grin breaks out on her face, and then she just says cousin, and she opens her arms and gives him this huge hug. And I love that. It's not something that comes across that strongly in the books. It's not something that elsewhere comes across that strongly on the show, but I think it says huge amounts about her character. The way that this was the person who was king when she could have been queen on the show, because on the show the choice was her or Viserys, and Viserys won. But still, she does not hold that grudge. Still, she sees this family member and she cares about this family member. And that says huge amounts about her as a character. As for her relationship with Daemon, I think the implication, if you forget the whole Laenor thing, is that she probably viewed him in the same way. But, and this is a big but, he married her daughter and they had children, and so he is the mother of her grandchildren even after Laena died. So there is a closer familial relationship than there is with Viserys. She clearly loves her grandchildren, so I think she can't hate Daemon. And I think that she probably, from what we can tell, she probably saw the love there between them. So of the two marriages of her children, probably she would see that the stronger one was Daemon and Laena rather than Rhaenyra and Laenor. So what's the relationship with Daemon? Probably a little bit annoyed, angry that the two of them married so swiftly after the deaths of her two children, but I don't think she hates him. I don't think there's a much of a hint that she hates him in the books or even in the show. High Fire Award Tour saying, why can't I gift memberships? I don't know, is the short answer. If you are a member, I think after a few months, I don't know how many, then you can gift memberships as well. Let's go to a question from Emily saying, a little off topic, but would you explain why Aegon the Conqueror's prophecy needed to be kept secret, only passed down to the future heir, and whether or not you think from a political and historical standpoint that was a good idea? If the prophecy was widely known, I'm thinking it would have saved confusion, for example, avoiding Alicent misinterpreting Viserys' dying words. It might have focused more resources on the Wall and the Night's Watch. Alternatively, perhaps, if a lot of people knew about the prophecy, it would have been destabilizing, causing more war against the wildlings or cause people to scoff at the prophecy. In any event, I'm not seeing much downside to having the prophecy be widely known. Do you? Well, thank you for the message. I mean, I think this is something I've been thinking about quite a lot, it has to be said. The prophecy was introduced for the show, so this isn't a book thing. I say it's not a book thing. George R. R. Martin will expand on this theme in future books, no doubt about that. But this was introduced for the show, and the clear implication, as you say, is that in show world, this was passed down from king to heir, to the extent where when we get up towards the Dance of the Dragons. Viserys knew about it, and then he passed this down to Rhaenyra, and that's it. Daemon did not know about it. Daemon did not know this prophecy, even though he was heir for a long time. So the implication is at the start of the Dance of the Dragons, the only person who knew this was Rhaenyra. Why would they just keep it to the passing it on to the heir? I mean, I think it keeps it feeling special and a lot more of an imperative. If this was just a prophecy that everybody knew, then it would probably lose its impetus for the holder of that prophecy. Is my general, that's more of a kind of a psychological take on this, is that if this was, by the time this has got down to what we now at the third, fourth, fifth generation, by that point it might just feel like it's this is just a thing everybody knows, at some point this has to happen kind of thing. If you're pulled aside by your father and your father sort of intones to you, this is something which was handed down to me by my father and his father before him, kind of thing, that makes it feel like this is a very, very serious thing. So on a purely psychological level, I completely understand why you have it just passed down from one person to the next. From a historical perspective, obviously this makes the passing down of the prophecy quite tenuous. One person passing it to the next person, what if that person dies? The prophecy gets lost. And that is what happened. At some point between Rhaenyra and Daenerys. Now, we can speculate, I have speculated, on where in that long period of history the line of prophecy was broken, but it's very clear that Rhaenyra knew it. She has not yet passed it on down to the next generation. And it's also very clear that Daenerys does not know it. So at some point, that got missed. Which means, from a historical perspective, you would hope that Daenerys should know this. Therefore, you probably should have told more people. Would lots of people knowing it somehow dilute it? I mean, I was just trying to look at the way you worded this. Would it have been destabilizing, causing more war against the worldlings? If people actively believed it, perhaps. But the issue is that the Targaryens, at least this is my take on what the issue is the Targaryens' rule over Westeros, particularly in the early years, was not that of one of the people. They are still the conquering nation. It is Jaehaerys who was there right at the very beginning of House of the Dragon. It was him who establishes this principle of exceptionalism, that the Targaryens are different to everyone else. They do not have to follow the same rules as everybody else. They do not have to follow the same religion. They can live different moral lives to everybody else. This is the way that they have been set up, that the Targaryens are different. So if it came out that the Targaryens have to be there in order to save the planet, this prophecy, would the people buy into this? Probably not. I mean, the Targaryens would have done, but would the people, if the people think, okay, the Targaryens have gone, then that prophecy proved not to be right. That's probably where they're at. The people as a whole, south of the neck, obviously, were followers of the Seven, not the Targaryens. And so if the Targaryens came out and said, we've got this prophecy that we've had from times of old, then I don't think the people would have bought into it. So I completely understand not announcing this great prophecy, but perhaps it should have been given to more members of House Targaryen. Particularly, I find it quite hard the idea that Viserys didn't pass it on to Daemon during that long period where Daemon was his heir. Question in the chat. Raven Review saying, have you done a Daemon study yet? I'd go look, but I fear I missed something here. So there is a Daemon Targaryen, I think a video, might be 2 videos. I'm working on this with Aziz, History of Westeros. As you know, I do quite a few collaborations with him. There will be a Daemon Targaryen proper character study coming up at some point in the next month or 2. High Fire Award Tour saying, welcome to the channel member. And High Fire Award gifted 5 in Deep Geek memberships. Thank you to lots of people. Welcome all of these other people: Terra Incognita, General Vague, Lisa Dennis, and Robert Gurney. So welcome to the Members Club, all of you. Martin S. saying, if the prophecy was more widely known, I think there would be more Wheel of Time-like storylines in this world, would be my guess. Yeah, so if the prophecy was more widely known, then more Wheel of Time-like storylines, like a promised person. I mean, I think that the Wheel of Time, sorry, I'm just trying to work my way back. So the Wheel of Time, the big thing about the Wheel of Time type storyline is this is a wheel. And so history is repeating itself. I think in the world of Westeros, history does repeat itself, but not in that explicit way. It more echoes than it does in the Wheel of Time. If lots of people knew about it, would there be more of a Prince that was promised vibe to it? Perhaps. And Andrew Cade just saying thanks to High Fire Award Tour for becoming a member and gifting memberships. Yeah, thank you very much. I have to admit, I don't know huge amounts about how the memberships work. Having set them up on the channel, I probably should investigate more, but that is very generous. Thank you very much, High Fire Award Tour. Let's go to Maura Lee saying, or asking whether Rhaenys was ever told of the prophecy. If not by her grandfather, perhaps by her grandmother, Alicent. I think it's very likely that Alicent did know the prophecy. Whether it was passed down to Rhaenys is not clear. It is clear that Jaehaerys must have known it. Jaehaerys probably would have passed it down to Aemon when he named him his heir. Now, would Aemon have passed it on down to the next generation? If they follow the same pattern, no. Because the pattern is that you only pass it down to your heir once the king has died and you're king. So if they follow the same pattern, then no, Rhaenys would not have known. Does that match up with what we see of Rhaenys? Yeah, we don't see anywhere in book or show anything from her that implies that she knows what this prophecy is. So I think the short answer is no. Martin S. saying, I meant it would affect people's actions, how they regarded specific people. Anyhow, you seem particularly tired today, Robert, to my sympathy. Well, yeah, it's been a long week, and it's quite snowy here, actually. I'll just seems okay again now. We did get quite a bit of snow here, but how it would affect people's actions, yeah, it would affect a lot more people's actions, and that's something George R. R. Martin is quite strong on, is the idea that the prophecy is not so much about the truth of the prophecy, it's about the whether people believe in it or not. Let's go to a question from Creative Branches. saying, well, hello there, Robert. Hello there. While the show canon has Laenor surviving and Rhaenys blaming Rhaenyra for his death, in what ways is this different in the book? Does Rhaenys make it clear she holds this grudge against Rhaenyra? Also, what is your take on why Rhaenyra hasn't just told Rhaenys and Corlys that their son is alive? Yeah, so in the book, then it's not clear. The plot is not as clear. On the show, they made it seem quite clear that that Laenor died and that this was in order for Rhaenyra and Daemon to marry. In the books, this is presented as a lot more of a coincidence, a happy coincidence for the two of them. The implication, my reading of it anyway, is that the implication in the book is that a lot of this is Daemon's doing. His wife dying probably wasn't anything to do with him, but the fact that there was the fire at Harrenhal which killed Rhaenyra's lover, the fact that Carl Corrie was probably paid off by somebody, the implication is that that was Daemon. That does all imply that this was Daemon behind all of this rather than Daemon and Rhaenyra. On the show, this was very much Rhaenyra's idea. She wanted to help Laenor because Laenor had sacrificed a lot for her, and she wanted to give him. She did seem to care about him, and she did want to give him that chance at happiness. So, how is that? How is that different in the show, and why hasn't Rhaenyra just told Rhaenys and Corlys that their son is alive? Well, I think I've covered the why is it different in the book, but why on the show hasn't she said? I mean, I think this is to her credit because she could say, you know what, actually, he's still alive. We faked the whole thing and he's over in Essos. First of all, would people want to follow the kind of person who fakes someone's death? That makes them look a little bit sus. But secondly, I think we just have to doff our caps to her and say, you know what? She wanted to allow him a chance for a second and better life and a little bit of freedom. And she has accepted that the price of this is that people might view her less well. And that's okay. And she's taken it, and she's taken it on the chin, and she's accepted that, and she's moved on. So you have to stop and for a moment and go, well, what would happen if she does admit this? And I don't know where they're going with this in the show. Maybe on the show, she will say, you know what, actually, he's still alive. It's possible they'll go down that route. But if we go down this kind of thought corridor of what is it that would happen, if she turned around and say, you know what, actually, we didn't kill him. Actually, he's still alive. What on earth do you think Corlys and Rhaenys would do? Immediately they go and try and get him. Immediately they would try and bring him back into the fold. Immediately that would make Rhaenyra's marriage to Daemon null and void because Laenor's still there. Immediately that would make all of their children bastards. The implications of this are quite big, let's put it that way. And would Rhaenyra's claim to the throne therefore be supported by people if she turned around and said, you know what, actually, I faked my husband's death. You said that all my children by him were bastards. Well, actually, I'm admitting that my children by my other husband are bastards. It's not a good look. So why wouldn't she? Partly for good reasons. Well done her. She's taking it on the chin, allowing Laenor to escape, have a better life, and partly she's protecting herself, I think. Professor Shakespeare saying, why didn't Jaehaerys have Rhaenys marry Viserys? Would have saved trouble with succession and fight with Alicent. Yeah, I don't know about the exact timings of this, but I think Emma was already on the scene by this point. So that'll be why. Let's go to Andrew K saying, my biggest gripe with that change, Book Damon would not leave that loose end with Laenor, which could challenge his or Rhaenyra's or their children's claims. But I would agree with that. Book Damon is not the kind of person who would have allowed the possibility of Laenor coming back and just throwing their claim up in the air. But with Book Damon, the easiest way to interpret all of his motivations is that what is the route to Daemon getting most power? And then he does that. What is the route for Daemon getting most power? He marries Laena. What is the route for him getting most power? He marries Rhaenyra. What is the route for him getting most power? He kills this person. He kills that person. He may not have done all of the things that he's accused of within Fire and Blood, but he clearly does do the things which bring him closest to power. He starts off being the heir to the throne, then he drops all the way down 4th, 5th, 6th, and 9th to the throne. Then he slowly starts crawling his way back up to be as close to power as he possibly can do. He is ruthless as a character in the books. I love the way that Matt Smith has portrayed him. I think he's done a fantastic job. I think he's shown a side to Daemon I didn't know was there, but I think that's shifted the character away from a lot of where the book character is. I think that the book character should be this Lord Byron-esque mad, bad, dangerous to know character, which we see sometimes with show Daemon, but not all the time. Let's go to question from Rustler saying, hey Robert, what do you think Harold Westerling's role will be on the show now he has outlived his book counterpart? Also, they have confirmed 5 new dragons will be in season 2. Which 5 do you think will appear? Keep up the great work. Well, thank you very much. So let's take the first part first. Harold Westerling. Who is Harold Westerling? So Harold Westerling is the character in the show played by Graham McTavish, who many of you will know, Scottish actor, bald head, beard. He was the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. In the books, he dies and is replaced by Criston Cole before we get to the Dance of the Dragons. On the show, he survives up to the eve of the Dance of the Dragons, and then, if you remember, he sort of flounces off in this fit of morals, saying, I serve the king, not the hand of the king. I'm not going to go off and assassinate Rhaenyra. He leaves, which leaves Criston Cole in charge, basically. I have a feeling on the show they are going to merge his character with that of Stefan Darklyn, who is the Lord Commander of Rhaenyra's Kingsguard. So I think that probably we will next see Harold Westerling on the show going over to Team Black. We've already seen one member of the Kingsguard going over. I think he will head over to be part of Team Black. This will allow us to see 2 separate courts establish themselves. We have seen the court for Team Green, which is there. Team Black will establish its own court. Rhaenyra has started doing this, but by the end of season 2, we will very much, I suspect, see who is it who is Master of Sales, who is it who is Master of Coin, who is it who is Hand of the King, who are all of these different characters within her court, and then part of this will be who is the Lord Commander of the Knight Commander of the Kingsguard, and that is going to be Harold Westerling. So I think in the same way in Game of Thrones they did this for a few different characters, conflating characters to try and keep the overall number of characters down. I think Graham McTavish is too good and too prominent an actor for them to have just as a random support act for season 1 just disappearing. He will definitely appear again in season 2. He's not going to be appearing as part of Team Green. I think he's going to be there on Team Black. Maura Lee asking about Laenor, again about him disappearing off. Do you think that we will hear of his death later off screen? Now, I've talked about this a few times, and my general take is there are different possible options for what they do with Laenor. And this is all the focus of this is dragon lore. So Sea Smoke, his dragon, is one of the dragons that is claimed by one of the dragon seeds. So for those who don't know what that means, in Fire and Blood, we have the situation where Team Green have King's Landing, they've got the treasury, they've got power. Team Black, however, they've got a dragon deficit. Team Black have got lots of dragons, but not enough people to ride them. So they hatched this plan. They've hinted at already on the show. You saw Daemon going in and singing in Old Valyrian, High Valyrian, to Vermithor the dragon, and he is basically preparing Vermithor for the idea that he's going to be used again. He's going to be bonded with a new person. And the Team Black are wondering, where are we going to get people to ride these dragons? Because basically everybody has got a dragon. They come up with this great plan that the Targaryens have got lots of bastard children all over the place, over Dragonstone and Driftmark, so perhaps we'll get some of them to ride the dragons. And they do. They get 5 people who bond with dragons on Dragonstone. Now, one of the dragons that is bonded with is Sea Smoke, which is Laenor Velaryon's dragon. Now, this opens up huge amounts of issues in terms of dragon lore, because as we understand it at the moment, if you're bonded to a dragon, you're bonded to them until you die or they die. But Laenor, who in the books died, on the show didn't die. So how can somebody else bond with Laenor's dragon? Which leaves a few options. Option number 1, they change the law. They say, okay, so Laenor has abandoned Sea Smoke, and therefore Sea Smoke can now, the bond has been broken, Sea Smoke can now get a new rider. Option number 2 is they just ignore it. They leave Sea Smoke out of this. That's not a thing. They could write around this. There is a way to write around it all and just say, let's ignore that. Option number 3 is, as you suggest, Maura, perhaps we might see Laenor die off screen, or hear that he has died off screen. Option number 4 is the conspiracy theory that I've heard Joe Magician, Grey Area, a few others have come up with, which is perhaps Laenor will return. Perhaps in disguise, perhaps as Adam Velaryon, Adam of Hull, pretending to be a bastard child of Corlys Velaryon, and arriving and bonding with Sea Smoke, and it's like, here we go. This person, I'm not, promise you, I'm not Laenor Velaryon. That's possible. So those are 4, there might be more, but 4 obvious possibilities for where this is going to go. They could do any of them, is the short answer. It's not that they haven't written themselves into a corner with this. They could go any of those ways. The easiest way is just to say he died off screen. I don't really like that. That's just having sent this character off, we now want to know what happens to him, just to say, oh yeah, and then he died somewhere, let's forget about him, doesn't really work for me. The just ignoring sea smoke, again, doesn't really work for me, which does leave the other 2 options. So I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. It's I think a lot of people got very clear ideas on what will happen. I think they have deliberately left this open so they could run it a number of different ways. General Vague asking, how big is the cannibal? Cannibal is one of the dragons on Dragonstone. He is a feral dragon. He is hidden away. We don't know how old he is. We're not told. He is definitely quite a big and old dragon. Maybe he's there. We're told in Fireblood, maybe he was there even before the Targaryens arrived. We don't know. How big is he? We're not told. I think the answer is big. I think if they show us him, and I have a feeling they probably won't, but if they show us Cannibal, then he should be nearly as big as Vhagar. Question from Martin S. saying, who are the most skilled dragon riders throughout George R. R. Martin's world history? Can a rider be bonded to more than one dragon at a time? We've not seen a rider be bonded to more than one dragon at a time. In terms of the most skilled riders, I think Daemon has to be one of the most skilled. He, on a dragon, managed to take out a much bigger dragon, and that is not something, I can't think of another instance of that happening. So I think he clearly was one of the greatest dragon riders. I think Aegon, from what we hear, was one of the great dragon riders, but he never had to face any other dragons, so we don't know that. And Laenor seems to have been somebody who loved riding her dragon, as far as we can tell, was very skillful at it. Rassler, actually, the second part of your question was about new dragons. So I think the main thing here, in terms of the new dragons we're going to be seeing, the main things will be the dragons which will bond with the dragon seeds. So we will see Vermithor, Silverwing. We've seen Vermithor very briefly already. Silverwing, we will see Sheepstealer as well. Possibly we will see Cannibal. And as I say, it wouldn't surprise me if they keep Cannibal out of this. But Dreamfire would be great. That's who Helena rides. And possibly this season we might see Tessarion, which is who Deeren rides, Deeren being the other son of Alicent. So there are lots of dragons out there that we might be introduced to. Some of them maybe not. So Sunfire as well, we've not really seen. Sunfire being Aegon II's dragon, we will definitely see him in action in season 2. So yeah, I think that's it. There's about 6 that we might see, but a couple that they could decide to not do. Terra Incognita saying the easiest option is just to have everyone kind of forget about Sea Smoke. Yeah, exactly. That's the easiest option. It's not an option I like, but it's definitely the easiest one. Mike saying or asking, did the show or the books explicitly say that the dragons can only be bonded to one living rider? Have every dragon we know that have their riders die before new riders, or could they sense it? So the thing about dragon lore is that it's up in the air. We're not told huge amounts about it. The books on dragon lore we're explicitly told have been destroyed. They're counted as heretical. This is one of the subplots in A Song of Ice and Fire, is the fact that there are books of dragon lore out there, last remaining copies, probably in the Citadel. So we don't know is the short answer. We have one recorded incident or instance of a dragon rider surviving their dragon, which is Viserys, who survived Balerion. That's the only time we know when a dragon rider survived a dragon. And Viserys obviously decided not to bond with another dragon. But we do not have anyone who bonded with more than one dragon at a time. Let's have a quick flick through. Mike saying, couldn't it be a dragon's choice if they wanted to move on from a missing rider? If not, that would make them slaves to the living rider with no choice, which we know isn't the case. Yeah, that's interesting. So one of the things that the show have emphasized, and I think this is definitely something which has got a big tick from George R. R. Martin, is that dragons cannot be owned. They don't belong to the rider. There can be a bond, and a strong bond, between the dragon and its rider, but they can't be owned. They can't be made to do things. And we saw that very strongly in the Battle over Shipbreaker Bay, when Vhagar and Arax, incidentally, as well, before that, both went against what their riders wanted them to do. You cannot control a dragon. Viserys talks about this. So could a dragon decide to set aside its rider if the rider has abandoned them? Quite possibly. I would have liked there to have been a scene, if that were the case, a scene in season 1. Maybe they filmed it and it was cut and we just don't know about it. But a scene where we get Laenor just saying, "Hey there, Sea Smoke. I'm going now. It's been great. We've had fun, but I'm leaving you behind," and then going off. I know why they didn't include that, because that would have slowed the story. It would have ruined the big reveal at the end of that episode where he's still alive and he's escaped. So I get it completely why they didn't do that. But in terms of the lore, if they were going to do that, then I would have liked them to have some kind of scene along those lines. Let's go to question. I think actually I've got one more question from my patrons, so now is a good time to drop any more questions into the chat. This is from Maura Lee, saying Rhaenys and her dragon were killed facing off against Aegon II and Aemond. Why do you think she decided to do this, even though the odds were against her 2 dragons to 1? So and why didn't Rhaenyra offer her more support? So there are a couple of pages actually going through this in Fire and Blood, because it's a fascinating time. This happens after the news about Lucerys comes back to Rhaenyra, and we saw right in those last few seconds of season 1 the look in Rhaenyra's eyes when she discovers that her son has been killed. Everything changes for her. She's lost one child. She blames when she loses her daughter in birth or failed pregnancy, but she blames that on Team Green in the books very strongly. And then she loses her son, and she blames that rightly on Team Green. She is not well. She is not in a good place. And she basically recuses herself from the immediate tactical discussions. And what draws Rhaenys in the book, what draws Rhaenys into that is basically Team Green then decide, we're going to go on the offensive. We're going to catch Team Black out. We're going to try and draw out one dragon. Kristen Cole heads out with an army and starts attacking the few small places on the mainland that are supporting Rhaenyra. He attacks one. He attacks another. He gets to Rook's Rest. The Lord there sends a raven to Dragonstone saying, please help, the army's coming to get me. And this takes them a while. They're thinking about it for, I think it's 10 days they spend pondering this. And eventually Rhaenys, who seemingly on her own decides, I'm just going to head off and help out. And so she does. She just gets on a dragon and goes to try and help out. And to start with, this seems a pretty straightforward thing to do. Kristen Cole, what an idiot. He brought his army out and there's a dragon. Oh, the dragon's just going to burn the army. And she starts doing that. She starts just burning the army, at which point it's a surprise attack. Here comes Vhagar and Sunfire. And she realizes that she cannot escape. And so she decides, at the very least, I can take one of these down. And she takes out Sunfire. So that's the kind of the iteration of events we've got going on there. Rhaenyra recuses herself from this. Why? Because at a very human level, she's had a horrible few days. The thing that she's been promised all her life that she is going to inherit has now been taken away from her. She loses a child. She loses another child. It's a bad time for her. And Rhaenys just steps up and says, well, I'll deal with this. And so she heads out. So that's I think we have to take this at a very human level. Whether they'll go down that route on the show, I do not know. But I think we have to take this at a very human level and say Rhaenyra, for the first few days, weeks of this conflict, was not in the best mindset. Let's go to the chat. We've got a question from Caius Ballerina. Picking up, thank you very much. Picking up for all the artsy. Where did this thinking that people will not accept a female heir come from? Did people have trouble with Maegor naming Arya, or they just had no choice or were expecting a son still? So Maegor named Arya his heir on the expectation that he was going to have a son. So he wasn't thinking this is the person who will actually inherit. He thought, I will have a son. And this is why, at a very basic level, this is why he kept on marrying people, because he thought, well, eventually one of them will have a son. Did the people ever accept Arya? Well, I don't think they really had a choice under Maegor, as I think you're sort of suggesting here. I think if Maegor says this is the case, then people said that's the case. But he was young. Maegor, nobody thought he was about to die, so it wasn't really an issue. Who the heir wasn't the issue. But when Jaehaerys came in, and he said, actually, no, Arya, not her, it's me. I'm going to be your new king. Nobody really complained about it. Nobody said, but hang on a moment, shouldn't she be in charge? So this seems to be a part of the culture of Westeros. This isn't, I think this isn't something that the Targaryens came in and said, hey, you know what, it should just be the men who inherit. This was what the situation was in Westeros already. The men inherited, the women did not inherit. Occasionally a woman might, if all of the male heirs went and there was just a woman left, then yeah, okay, maybe the woman can rule for a while. Which we saw, incidentally, during the Dance of the Dragons and just after the Dance of the Dragons. It happened to a few of the main houses. But in general, the men inherited. And so I don't think this was the Targaryens coming in with a new fancy doctrine. This was simply the state of affairs in Westeros, and the Targaryens just fitted in with it. Matthew Stewart saying, do you think Rhaenys and Corlys will learn of Laenor's fate, or will they continue to believe that they're fighting a war for his assailants? I wonder, and I do not know, because this is the show going away from the books, so I don't know this. I wonder whether Rhaenys will die without learning it, but Corlys will discover it. Corlys goes on a journey as a character. Rhaenys dies relatively early in the Dance of the Dragons, and so she doesn't get to go on the same kind of journey that Corlys does. Corlys starts out thinking, this is it, this is my last great mission in life, is to put Rhaenyra on the throne. And then he kind of like wavers a bit here and there. Then she starts turning on his adopted sons, maybe actual sons, Adam and Alan Velaryon, and eventually he finds himself as part of this team who I think, if they play the show in the same way the books go, we will start rooting for an unofficial team of let's just end this war because it's causing too much pain and havoc. Him and Larys and a couple of others in the book, it's very clear they all decide towards the end of it, you know what, we just have to stop this. This is just too much. We have to stop it. And Corlys was a key part of that. So he goes on this journey to that place. But she dies a lot earlier. So I think that there's a fair chance that he will discover later on the truth of it. And it's a very, and I mean this as a compliment to the showrunners, if they go this way, it's a very George R. R. Martin way of doing these things, that they only, the truth only comes out after the people who would have perhaps benefited from it die. So I think that Rhaenys will not find out, and the truth will only come out afterwards. Hallam899 live. Did you do research on Murad IV and his links with Maegor I? I'm afraid I didn't. No, I will try to have a look out for that. Cole Karsnark saying, you don't get or deserve a happy ending if you run away while your family is being torn apart and your kingdom is in flames. That's beyond selfish and small-minded. I mean, this is obviously the flip side of this. We often talk, I think, about, well, will Laenor be brought back by people? Will Rhaenyra admit what happened? Will Corlys and Rhaenys find out about? What about Laenor? Let's think for one moment about Laenor himself. Yes, he's been given this second chance. He goes over to Essos. I don't know where they will say that he ends up in Essos, but news will start filtering out from Westeros. News that his ex-wife, the person who he owes his new life to, is not going to be queen. That her children that he raised as his own children were being killed. That the entire continent was going up in flames. He hears that they need dragon riders. What does he do? I think, although we didn't get huge amounts of character development for Laenor on the show, I think there's a chance that he goes, well, maybe I should return. It's not there in the books. There's not even a hint of it in the books. But from a human perspective, what would he do? Yeah, maybe he would return. Mike saying, do you think it matters to the 95% of the casual viewers about sea smoke? We noticed, but most probably don't know there is the sea smoke, only in one scene, I believe, at least in action. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to disagree. Yeah, the vast majority of people wouldn't notice or care, I suspect, if sea smoke just disappeared from the action from this moment onwards. That wouldn't be an issue for most people. And in terms of like a completely new piece of art, then it wouldn't be that big a thing. The main story exists outside of him. I just think if they're going to if they're going to make this bit of great art, they have to tie everything off in some way. They don't have to tie everything together, but they do have to tie everything off, and this is a loose thread. Right, let's have a quick flick through the chat. Carl Snark saying the safe life is not a Valarion's life or the life of a dragon rider. The entire point is to live fast, die young, and to go out in a blaze of glory. Well, that's perhaps literally what happened with Lena. Reflective Rambling saying, personally, I wish that Rhaenyra and Rhaenys got more moments like the bench scene. I know this is just time. Yeah, so that scene when the two of them were talking, I think was a great moment. It was foreshadowing. It was character building. I really liked that. I think that that's the kind of thing we didn't have. That wasn't in the book. This is the kind of thing the show did really well, is to say, well, what would have happened? We might not have read about that in the book, but what would have happened? The two of them would have met. They would have known each other. They would have spent time together in court. What would Rhaenys say to Rhaenyra? Because their situations do echo one another. They're not the same, but they do echo one another. So, yeah, this is one of the things I think they did really well. And it allows us to see an insight into that maturity that we have in Rhaenys. Finally, just from Mike, I think I will say, saying, I wonder if Rhaenys likes the queen that never was moniker, or if it is just a reminder. I think, certainly on the show, I think they have brought it to a point where she's accepting of who she is, and she's accepting of her fate. She's accepting of what has happened to her. She seems quite relaxed about it all. She doesn't pretend that she couldn't have been queen. She doesn't seem to want to be queen. She seems to have accepted where she is in life. And there's again another one of those scenes that I think they did really well, is the conversation between her and Corlys about his ambition, and her just sort of gently calling him out on it. He's there wanting to be making sure that his family is on the throne, and her just saying, does it matter to you whether or not this actually is your family? And he wants the family name there, and it's for her that's less of an issue. Martin S saying, if all of Westeros was united in all of Essos in one huge war, which side would win? Living only, no undead. House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones time separately. So yeah, if all of Westeros was united against all of Essos, Essos would win. I think is the short answer on that one. Yeah, Essos is massive compared to Westeros. The way when Tyrion goes down the river Rhoyne, he constantly is comparing it to what he knows. And when we read about places like Braavos, how their technology seems to be vastly superior to anything we've got in Westeros. When we think about Karth, this is huge amounts of times the size, or many of the other cities as well, a huge amount of the times the size of King's Landing, say. And there seem to be so many more magic users. The Dothraki, the Unsullied. Essos would, I think, easily win, personally. Okay, with that, I'm going to... Effectively, I'm saying, is Skagos a part of Westeros as Essos? I think most people count it as part of Essos. It's just off the coast of Essos because of demon unicorns. Horny goats, we will see them. I don't know, actually, did you see, on Twitter, I just tweeted out something George R. Martin said back in 2013 when he basically confirmed we're going to be getting unicorns in the Winds of Winter. So, yeah. from Skagos, but I don't think that tips the balance. Okay, couple of things I've not done. First of all, moderators, you are amazing. Thank you so much. I didn't thank you halfway through. I normally thank you halfway through. If you're in the chat right now, please give a little bit of love to the moderators. Patrons, thank you. Hugely appreciate you. I cannot do what I do without your support. I always say that, but I always mean it. If you would like to support this channel, there is a link down there, and also appearing soon somewhere around here, there will be a link to my Patreon page, which is the best way to support this channel. I have a second channel at some point soon-ish. All of the live content on my main channel is going to go over to IDG Live, appearing soon somewhere in the middle here, and also a link somewhere down there. IDG Live, I've already started putting new content on there. If you want short form content, just the kinds of things that not big enough points to be making in an entire YouTube video, but just a minute or so of explanation, they are happening now. I think I've got 3 up so far happening over there on IDG Live, so please do go and check that out. And also somewhere here, there'll be another link to other videos on this channel. Okay, I'm going to be taking a week off next week. I'm going to go and have some fun with my friends. So just relaxing, and I will send some exciting pictures from castles in Europe, I hope. So anyway, I will be back in 2 weeks' time, and we will be looking at Viserys, King Viserys, fresh in our minds with Paddy Considine. But take care, everyone, and I will see you again soon.